Well, with that, I'd like to open up to any comments or thoughts or questions. This is my perspective. As I said, I'm not an expert in the field. And the news is changing every day, even every moment. I dread to wake up in the morning and see what's happened in the intervening 10 hours. But you've been living this life along with everyone else. And so I'm curious for your thoughts or reactions and your feelings on this situation. I see a hand up for Lori. Please go ahead.
So I think there's a couple of things. I agree with much of what you have to say. I'm a cynic too. And I think that's from having studied history as a profession. I think the one thing that we have failed to understand in the West is that we assume that there's rules that states operate by, especially first world states, nuclear powers. Russia is not the Soviet Union anymore. It's not a government, it's a mobocracy. It's run by oligarchs who operate like the mafia. I mean, and one of the reasons that the last president in this country synthesizes quite as much as he does with that is that that's how he thinks of government and of life. It's run by a mob, only it's his mob. So we have to hit, if we're going to solve this at all, we have to hit them as hard as they can possibly hit them. It's the only way a bully understands. We can't, they don't care about reputation. They don't care about the rules of nations. They don't care about anything but brute force. And that's what Putin is all about. And the only thing he'll understand is somehow to hit the back. Now, what we do, that is hard for me to, because I don't know everything that we're doing, but I do think that sanctions are not enough. I think there needs to be some sort of, for one thing, disabling of the electric grid in Russia. I think there are things that we can do with cyber attacks. I think there are things of providing weapons, as we did to the Resistance, the Marquis in France and in places like during World War II. You have to combat them like they're the Nazis. And I think that's my opinion. And I think much harsher measures have yet to be taken, and the world has to hang together, and there will be pain on our side, but we have to do it. And we have to be unified to do it. And I think right now what's hurting us more than anything else are people like Josh Hawley and Carlson and so forth, who are appearing on Russian TV as, supporting Putin, and they don't get it.
Well, but I can imagine Bernie Sanders showing up on Iraqi TV 15 years ago.
Well, there's something to be said for that too, and I agree.
Okay, so I see Sheila and then Leora.
Well, the only point I wanted to make was when you talked about, hopefully it's not too little too late. But I think the one thing we need to remember is that the previous administration wouldn't even bother to put in gradual sanctions. They were not at all in favor of any kind of warning or consequences for whatever Putin did. So I think we have to also consider that we're in a different place today than we were even 18 months ago, when possibly something could have been done, or even in 2014 when
which was the previous administration.
Correct. Not just the immediate previous one,
right.
But previous administrations either did not take the threat seriously or had other priorities. But I don't think this is a situation where we can shuffle it down in the list of things that need to be addressed.
Yes, I see Leora and then Larry.
Well, I totally agree with both you and Lori that this is like looking at 1939 onward all over again. And if you don't stop the bully now, he's going to keep encroaching, because nothing is enough. And it is all about power. God knows he's got a huge continent of a country that he could be doing something with. He doesn't need more land, but it is all about him. And it was interesting today to hear that the daughters of the oligarchs, especially the one that owns the soccer team in England, two of them went on Twitter and commented about no war. This isn't right. Now, it's really dangerous to do that. And I guess one of the things that has really struck me about all of this is the bravery of the Russian citizens who have gone out on the streets to protest. Some people might say it's their stupidity, but because they know the consequences, but I think that's a very brave thing to do, to speak up. And that's about all I have.
Thanks. Larry?
Two answers. First, your first question, what frightens me is going all the way back. Remember in 1992, Bill Clinton, liberal Democrat, he's the one that made the commitment and went to Kiev to announce the commitment that when they gave up their nuclear bombs, we had their back. And he was a bright enough politician to know that would not survive his presidency. And then Barack Obama, when the Russians decided to move into Crimea, he kind of smiled. And I am scared. There's absolutely no teeth. It's peace in our time over and over again. And the other point I wanted to make, which is equally terrifying, is what else is going on in the world. The Chinese are getting a very clear message that when they move to take Taiwan, ain't nobody going to do nothing.
I'm not so sure about the China case. There was supposedly they violated airspace recently and people were very upset about it. But if you were paying attention, they violate airspace every 3 months. Like
Oh, yeah.
It was a routine violation of airspace. It was not an extraordinary violation of airspace.
Look at the message they're getting now as to what happens when you get serious.
Well, yeah, we'll have to see. They're not being constructive by releasing any limitations on wheat imports from Russia into China, where if the goal is to provide economic pressure, they're providing a release valve for it. So they are not a constructive contributor at the moment either. It's a lot of variables. There's a lot of moving pieces, and it's a tough world to be in. And I posted something just recently that was on CNN that said Mitt Romney was right. I don't know if you remember the presidential debate in 2012, where Romney said that our greatest geopolitical foe right now is Russia. And Obama's response was, the 1980s called and want their foreign policy back. And that was a funny line, but looking back at the 10 years since 2012, Russia has indeed proven to be an intractable and implacable opposition to the order in which we live now. So we maybe owe a slight apology. I still would have voted for Obama, but maybe Romney had a point to make. Yeah, Brown, please.
Just that I've been thinking so much about that moment in that debate over the past few months and how much fun was made of Romney at the time. And yeah, he was right.
He was right. Well, it's like Winston Churchill, was in the wilderness for all those years, warning about rearmament, and they later conceded. We don't know what the next steps are going to be. We don't know what the American domestic political reaction is going to be. We forget sometimes how disunited the U.S. was in 1939 and 1940, how strong the isolationist feeling was. I just read a book this last year about that period in 1940, even into mid-1941, of people trying to resist being dragged into the war and feeling like Roosevelt was doing it. It took a Pearl Harbor to tip that tide and to create the unity that carried us through the war. But before that point, even into late 1941, there was very strong opposition to any involvement in this foreign war. I see Cindy, and then there's a question in the chat I'll bring in as well. And then Bill after that.
One of the things that I've seen in a lot of the TikTok coverage, from local, just kind of average everyday people, there's a lot of conversation about how many of the Russian troops who are there are young kids who were just, showing up for their mandatory military service, and just the overall sentiment of quite a lot of Russians who really are not wanting this war themselves. And the fact that this is being led by these oligarchs, by these people with such extreme wealth that it's kind of demonstrated that they're untouchable, that the rules don't apply to them, even with sanctions and attempts to, really challenge them. They can just kind of brush it off. And extreme wealth disparity is not something that is unique to Russia. We have, how many billionaires and 100 billionaires in the US, in China, in Europe, and in all of these places. And I think that there's kind of an awareness of that untouchability that this brings, for the 99.9% of us who make up the rest of the population who are going to face the biggest consequences. It's not the oligarchs' kids who are, right there on the ground bombing hospitals or running over cars with tanks. They're off safe in their homes.
I will also point out, if you looked at the average income of members of Congress, it's far above the typical income in the US. So Bill, please.
The answer to your first question, the dread question, I think every individual has to come up with their own basis. So one of the things is that it's hard to fathom that somebody's going to maximum war for some concept that has no meaning back in before 1990, which most people can't probably understand. And the other disappointing thing is two institutions that we think is our protection for democracy, the United Nations and NATO, are not possible to enforce anything at this point in time. And I think those UN for sure is going to fall in disrepute, not only from the right who never liked it in the first place, but I think from the left who is going to see it as an ineffective body, except perhaps when it goes to some small African nation or something of that sort. But in the big game, it's toothless.
The irony is, do you know who the president of the Security Council is at the moment? It's
Russia.
Just happens to be their turn. So they adjourned the meeting, after 5 minutes.
And they
not much you can
vetoed the resolution today.
Right, exactly. So one of the questions in the chat box was, how can we confront him without running into nuclear war? This is the ultimate fear. And I think part of the challenge is that, the Soviet Union and the United States confronted each other for decades. They did it indirectly. They did it through proxies. They didn't fight army to army. But there was a fear actually during the Korean War that if they had pushed too far north, if they had crossed the Yalu River and actually invaded China itself, there was a fear that the Soviets might actually drop the bomb. And there was also a fear in Israel, believe it or not, during the Six-Day War, during the Yom Kippur War in 1973, that if the Arab armies from Syria and from Egypt had broken through the lines, there was concern that Israel might use its nuclear deterrent as a way to stop them. So we have come close to that being used, but the question becomes, do we really think that he would actually drop the bomb? I doubt it, to be honest, not only because of retaliation, but someone was saying maybe he'd use a tactical nuke in Ukraine. And I said, that would be totally stupid because the whole point of Ukraine is their wheat fields. That's a major contributor to their economy. And if you irradiate all the wheat, no one's going to eat it. No one's going to take it. Even if it's declared clean, it's going to be radioactive in sort of social media concept. And so I think that nuclear war is being threatened, but sometimes you have to call the bluff. It's sort of like when I have wedding couples and they say, my mom is threatening not to come to the wedding if we don't do X. And so my first question to them is always, is she bluffing? Not, are you going to give in to her demands? Because you have to decide, is this a credible threat or not? There is a non-zero threat of nuclear war, but there always has been. There has been since the atomic weapons were invented. So it is possible that this could happen. But, Leora, the wind blows both ways. And I don't think that you can drop a tactical nuke in Ukraine and not have it affect Russia. I just don't think it's possible. So Brown had his hand up again, and then the Schwartzes wanted to jump in.
Just, I was thinking about Cindy and, that it's at least the Russian army. I don't know about the other branches, but it's not volunteers. It's not, if you're fighting, it's not consensual fighting. And then hearing in the news today that the government of Ukraine is saying that males 18 to 60 can't leave the country doesn't seem great to me for a couple reasons. It's very sexist, and it seems like it would be much better to have the people who want to stay and fight be the ones fighting, and it seems like you would have plenty of them. I guess they're not, but I don't know. There's varied reports. I don't know what's going on.
Well, this falls into the general philosophical category of when can a government compel you to do something? We compel you to pay taxes. You might not want to do that. We could rely on voluntary donations, but we decide to compel you to do it. And this is the case of military service, whether a government's allowed to or needs to, that's an assessment they have to make. Obviously, Ukraine feels desperate that they need bodies. And unfortunately, some of those bodies will turn into bodies. Tamar and Ron, please.
So I was hearing a lot of discussion about sanctions being ineffective, and the experts that we have heard talking on the news have seemed to feel like there was some value in the sanctions, some real value. And I guess I'm wondering, for those who don't think that what has thus far been done is effective or the right tactic, I ask, well, what is the right tactic? I mean, it's very easy to be the armchair critic. So I'm kind of wondering, like, okay, if you want to see something that you would deem more valuable get done, what exactly is that?
Well, part of the challenge is also that Biden is trying to maintain consensus. He doesn't want to split within NATO. So my understanding is one of the reasons they didn't include the SWIFT banking transfer system as something to kick them out of was because that's how Germany pays for the oil and gas they get from Russia. And they need that oil and gas, and they need to maintain those payments, or their people are going to freeze over the winter or have huge energy spikes in prices. So that's, again, that case of, does the consequence hurt you or not? But they could have made more consequences that would have hurt them more and more quickly. The other idea that's been floated is they could have provided more than just promises of humanitarian aid to Ukraine, which is what they've gotten so far. We'll send you some bandages, but there are many more arrows in the quiver that we could be sending them and could have sent them previously once this started to accelerate. The people are now talking about a new Lend-Lease Act. And we don't know what the next act of this drama is going to be. If Kyiv falls, there are still other cities that are not occupied because the Russian army has gone around most cities and not invaded the city centers. Does it become an ongoing insurgency, or does that collapse and people acquiesce to Russian domination? We just don't know what the next steps are going to be, and our next steps are going to be defined by those next steps. But where we are now, we could try to go back and ask questions. But the reason why it's worth doing the armchair evaluating is that there might be a sequel. This act might play again, and then we have to decide what our actions should be then. I see Larry has his hand up as well.
Just a partial answer to the question. I was very surprised and disappointed how clear Biden wanted to make it over and over again that there's no way a US soldier was going to put his foot on the ground in Ukraine. Even if he intended that, why did he have to announce it to Putin? At least leave some worry that you might be staring down the barrel of a US tank.
Well, so Larry, let me, I mean, the answer to that question, I think. It's domestic political considerations. People are not interested, both on the left and on the right, on having just brought back the soldiers from Afghanistan, on shipping them out again to get involved with a country far away of people we know not of. I mean, it's that same mentality of there's those people, those that are far away, and what are we doing getting involved? I don't think he would have had very strong support to unilaterally extend treaty protections to Ukraine that they don't have.
No, I understand that. And I think even if he fully intended to never send a US soldier, why did he have to tell Putin so specifically, don't worry?
That was true.
I mean, I think if he had said, we're not going to send any soldiers, but we'll send 100,000 tanks, that might have been different. I see Sandra's hand up, and then Sheila, and then Peggy.
Okay, yeah, and I just add, Biden had made hints that maybe troops would come, the Republicans would be, maybe some of the left would be saying, this is outrageous, we don't want to go back there, they'd be used against him.
And they'd be demanding passing a war resolution, that's one of the news things that's been promoted, that, stop sending troops everywhere without declaring war. That's what you're supposed to do. So Sheila, and then Peggy.
Well, somebody did mention the weakness of the UN and NATO. And even Trump brought it up. He wanted them to pay, but that's not the issue. But the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was post-World War II. And the last thing the countries in NATO wanted to do was to rearm Germany. And so it has historically and deliberately not been as strong as it possibly should have been. And they left it to the United States to do the policing, unfortunately. And maybe this is a wake-up call for some of those countries that if they want to protect their own, they may need to provide a little bit more assistance and not totally rely on the US.
Yeah. Peggy?
I think one of the problems that we have right now is, in addition to the fact that we're such a divided United States right now, is that they're concerned over in Europe and they see this divide. They don't want to get on board fully because they think it looks like maybe a Trump could return, or that kind of government could return. So they're having trouble trusting us that we're strong enough to pull ourselves together and actually be a good adversary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bro?
One thing I've been hearing for a while is, Putin not wanting NATO countries on his doorstep, not wanting to be bordering NATO countries. Well, with the exception of Moldova, every country that borders Ukraine is a NATO member. So if he doesn't want NATO on his doorstep, don't walk up to the doorstep of NATO.
Well, but what people are speculating, he might be wanting to set up a puppet government there, so that he has a puppet in Belarus, he has a puppet in Kiev, he has a puppet in Moldova, and then those are the ones bordering the NATO countries. That's his way around it. Any last thoughts? I'm sorry we can't end on an upbeat note. Those who know me know I try to be optimistic and positive and hopeful, and if things go bad, we'll deal with that. But I'll be candid. These are dark times, and I am not optimistic about where we go from here. And some of it is very personal. The people you're seeing on those TikToks, they're not being subtitled. They're talking in English. They know our culture. They're living in our interconnected global world. I mean, what's new about this war is the cyber warfare, but also the instantaneous TikTokness of it. These people are extensions of the global internet culture, and seeing them suffer is that much harder because we see ourselves in their shoes. We know people connected to them who are here in our own communities, and we worry that a breakdown of order there could mean a breakdown of order anywhere.
Do you know if the TikTok has reached, because I follow TikTok, a lot of younger people? Because My understanding is some folks who were younger were not paying attention to this and didn't know what the big deal was, and I don't know if they figured it out.
I don't think that's right.
Well, I
Can I
think
say
I think that's true of any political issue, that unless it makes it to TikTok, my daughter doesn't know what's happening. Yeah, Michelle, go ahead.
I wanted, at one point you said, why does this feel scarier than other times? And why is it impacting us more? And I do think because of social media and the internet, it makes the world feel like a much smaller place. You know, before the internet, that was just distant news that you heard on the 10 o'clock news. Now with 24/7 news and internet and TikTok, it makes the world feel very small. So you feel like it's happening closer to home. It could happen here. So I think that's why it makes it much scarier this time.
Yeah. Ilya,
And the
please.
kids are following along. I just want to say, my kids are following this news along, you know, and Alexa lives near a Ukrainian village and everything. And so it is the younger generations, they are watching this also.
Michelle, I hate to tell you, your kids aren't that kiddie anymore.
I know, you know what I mean? But when we were growing up, those were faraway problems. It feels much closer to home this time.
Absolutely. Ilya, please.
So two things. One is, I heard from somebody who is a bit of an expert historian who lives in Moscow. And his view is that the primary concern for Putin is to make sure the democracy that's been flourishing in Ukraine doesn't skip and jump into Russia. That is his primary concern. He made sure that Georgia is, basically, he has no problem letting Belarus staying completely independent because they're another dictatorship. So I think that's the primary thing. And the other one is, with the benefit of a hindsight, if Germany didn't give up its nuclear power and didn't make a critical and long-term decision to depend on Russia, maybe Russia wouldn't have been in position to do what they're doing. And I think in the long run, Putin probably miscalculated. And look at what happened in the Russian stock market. Talking about penalties, went from what, 16,000 to under 8,000 within the last week. So that's a major pain. Just imagine in US, the market going down from Dow 33,000 to 16,000. Lots of people would feel pain. And but a dictator's job is first and foremost to protect his dictatorship.
Right.
And this guy been planning this shit probably from 2005, that he has been building up the case to make sure that the democracy is not, he's been fighting color revolutions everywhere, Syria, Kazakhstan, it just goes everywhere. And so he'd become a de facto, the policeman for dictators, because he's one.
Again, I hope that at least having the chance to talk about this and think about this with a little bit of historical perspective and seeing some Jewish sides to the story also helps it seem more real and present for you. We'll have to stay tuned and see where things go. It may be that I'll be dumping a sermon topic in a month from now and have to talk about this again if we need to. But part of the goal of our community is to provide that support and encouragement through difficult times. And this is one of those times. So I'm so glad so many of you joined us for this conversation tonight. We were actually up at 37 screens initially, which is really almost a record for us for a Shabbat service. So thank you very much.